Hello, I'm Jessica. Welcome to my corner. Literally, I am in a corner. I decided that I wanted to attempt a YouTube video channel, entity, whatever, because I am a lifelong lover of books, and they are actually probably a bit of a hyperfixation of mine and have been since I was a very small child. And it has apparently now come to the point where I can no longer keep all of the thoughts just rattling around in the back of my head to myself. So here we are. I just really want to yak about books and all my thoughts about books. And which book, pray tell, finally brought this about? This one. This absolute chunk. This is Middlemarch by George Eliot. Which, for all the nerds, book nerds out there, you probably already know this, but George Eliot is a pen name. The author's actual name was Mary Ann Evans, and it is about this fictional town, Middlemarch, in England. And she published it serially at first, from 1871 to 1872. So this book has been on my bookshelves for a legitimate decade. Full decade. I am 37 years old, and I absolutely for sure have had this book since I was at least 27, probably longer than that. And I unusually, for me, do not remember why or where I bought the book. Normally I have a very good memory for where I got it, why I decided to purchase it, and this one is just a complete black hole. I don't remember. The edition I originally bought, which is actually not the one I just held up, it's this one. Look how beautiful she is. If I had to guess, was probably an aesthetic buy. I mean, look at her. Look how beautiful she is. And then once I started reading it, I was obviously just completely terrified that I was going to immediately splatter spaghetti sauce all over this incredible, like, light rose, beautiful cover, and I just, I couldn't deal with that. So I found this cheap copy at a used bookstore, and this was the one that I continued on with and took everywhere, and she's now thoroughly broken in. So you may see both of these floating around at any given point, but originally this was the one I bought, and this was the one that sat on a shelf for 10 years. And part of that was because after I bought it, I was so intimidated by it, for no good reason. No one had ever said anything to me about Middlemarch. They had never trash talked it, or I really didn't even know what it was about, if I'm being completely honest. I had no clue what the plot was. Maybe it was just the length, you know, because she's chunky, she's big. But yeah, no one had ever said anything about it that would have put me off, so this was all completely self-inflicted. That's very on brand for me. You'll learn. And yeah, so even being intimidated by the length is strange to me. I'm not usually averse to reading a big book. I'm not usually intimidated by size. But anyway, so there it sat for 10 years. And all of a sudden, I woke up one morning and my brain was like, you know what today is? Today is the day that we're gonna read Middlemarch. And I was like, okay, sure, that sounds good. So I opened it up and turned to the prelude. Dun, da, 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 right there. And read those first 3 paragraphs. The prelude is not long. It's literally just 3 fairly sized paragraphs. And as one does, immediately started crying. I just promptly burst into tears, which, to be clear, is not something that I do ever. I'm just not one to cry over books. Even if they're very sad, even if I'm very moved by them, I'm just not much of a crier. So yeah, that is how deeply those opening lines hit me. And this is going to sound incredibly woo-woo, but whatever. I genuinely felt like after reading them, the book was speaking to me, and what it was saying was, I've been waiting for you. I'm so glad you're finally here. I've been waiting so patiently. And I guess my tears were just my return thought of thank you for waiting for me. It was like I had come to it exactly when I was supposed to, which perhaps sounds very cheesy, but it is nonetheless true. So, of course, I knew after that this was going to be a thing, right? A capital letters thing. Alrighty, so I continued along and read the book, and as I'm going through reading it, I could tell I was percolating, you know, just stewing and ruminating, because that's what I do. And when I reached the end of it, it was just like, okay, if I don't yammer on about this in some way, it is going to take me out. That is really how I felt. So here I am. And it took me a very long time to figure out what I wanted to say for, you know, an initial video, which, you know, I hope, suspect, will be the first of several, probably, for this book, at least. Because, I mean, look at her. She's very long. She's very long. And we're not mad about it. Trust me, we're not mad about it. So, anywho, I was really floundering on what I wanted to talk about first, because I have so many things that I want to say. So, you know, an embarrassment of riches, if you will. But I finally decided that I think the best place to start is to discuss what I came to think of just in my own head as I was reading as the background noise of the novel. So, you know, of course there are the characters and the plot and all of that, but I started to get an inkling that I was maybe missing out on some social context that was just simmering in the background, just, you know, bubbling along in the back. And as I probably just implied, it was subtle, because I firmly believe that George Eliot must have belonged to the show don't tell camp of fiction writing, which is the correct one, by the way. But yes, it was definitely there. So as I said, she published this book starting in 1871, but the actual setting of the story of Middlemarch is actually starting in 1829, which I hope will become clear why I think that's important as we continue on. And look, I was lazy. I was lazy for a minute. I'll admit it. This became clear that there were some things happening that I didn't know enough about. And I had that urge to just be like, ugh, I don't want to research. But then I checked myself, right? I gave myself a nice little reminder, a talking to that went something like, Jess, 100 years ago, if you had wanted to learn more and research about the things that are being mentioned in this book, you would have had to get your ass up, go to a library, and spend hours and hours of time finding the information that you want, as compared to picking up your little pocket computer and taking 5 minutes to find those very same things. And that really put it in perspective. And I also have a very deep research nerd streak. So then we were off to the races. That's all we needed. And you know, I decided that yes, I have to go deeper than just the notes section, which, to be clear, you know, this is both of these actually, they have different covers, but these are both the Penguin Classics. The inside, the innards, if you will, have a lovely, prolific, if you will, notes section. So it wasn't that the notes section wasn't good, but, you know, and this is a bit of a rant, but to me at least, often even reading the note doesn't necessarily give you what you need for context. So, for example, I'm making this up. If I look at a note from the notes section and it says, oh yes, this person is referencing the very popular Ladies' Home Journal magazine of Westminster from 1817, fake, all fake, I'm making this up. Well, if I don't know why that magazine was published, who edited it, how it came to be, what its goals or aims were, even having that note, while helpful to a certain degree, doesn't exactly give me everything I need still, right? Okay, you get it. So, yes, we've decided we're gonna dig deeper. I did that, and once I did that, it became clear, I mean, to me at least, that there were definitely 3 main background noise, social things happening that were important to know about thoroughly. And I think understanding those just sort of leads really nicely into a discussion of what George Eliot accomplishes narratively in this novel. And, you know, that feels like a good goal for a first ever chat. Just easy breezy. So firstly, what are, I'm sure you're sitting there screaming at me, what are the background things that we should be aware of? The first one is the railroad. The trains, as I said, it's 1829, starting out when we first encounter this book in the setting, and the trains are coming, but they're not here yet. The trains have not reached Middlemarch yet, but they are imminent. And everyone's talking about it, all the people in the town, this coming of the railroads. And, you know, obviously trains did already exist at this point in time in 1829. There were trains in England, but they were, I don't know if I can say all, but definitely most were very much in the northern part of Great Britain. And they simply had not made their way down, if you will, to this middle part of the country where this fictional town is set. And so with this fact of the trains coming but not having yet arrived, there is this anxious, very anticipatory energy to all the conversations people are having about these trains. You know, it's coming, but when is it gonna get here? And is it gonna get here? And what is it going to be like, right? The people of Middlemarch have never seen a train. They know of trains. They've surely heard about them. People have brought tales of the train, right? But they haven't actually had any experience with a train, ridden on a train, maybe even heard or seen a train. And so from this ignorance and this anticipation, there are two very clear camps of people with an opinion about this train situation that the town has divided into. So, first, you have the much more optimistic group, maybe the excited group, if you want to think of them that way, who see the railroads as this wonderful thing. It's going to make everyone's lives better and encourage progress and speed up travel, and yay, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. That's the first group, right? Then you have the second, arguably more vocally vociferous group of people that really want nothing to do with this. And their negativity comes from several different directions, right? On the one hand, the actual logistical, physical laying of the tracks across the English countryside is pretty much blasphemous to them. They think that it's going to be this visual blight, gonna be ugly AF, right? And then on top of that, also having these tracks splitting up potentially pieces of land is going to make the work of tenant farmers, landowners, possibly several different groups of people who interact with that land logistically harder, right? What are you gonna do if you're a farmer and half the land you're farming is on one side of the track and then the other half is on the other, right? Yuck. So there's that as well. So not only is it going to look gross, it's just gonna make a lot of things harder, potentially. So there's that angle. And then there's also, the train is scary, right? As I said, they have no experience with the train, and just descriptively, it seems overwhelming, fast, dangerous, reckless even, maybe. And there's, a chorus of women at one point in the book who have this little rant where they talk about never using the train. And, if it comes, real ladies would never think of riding on one, and et cetera, et cetera. It's very funny. And then finally, there are the people, how could we say this diplomatically? The less financially secure people of the town. I think that's pretty clearly implied in several ways, who are very cynical about the trains, particularly the light in which they are painted by the people who are very excited about them, right? So basically, they are like, okay, sure, the train will come. I don't think I have a whole lot of control over that. It's definitely coming, but I don't think that is going to materially change a whole lot about my life, because none of this shit ever does. And probably all it's going to do is create more money and more convenience for all of the people who already had a lot of money. It's not going to do anything for me. It's just going to, it's very much a, the rich get richer kind of argument. And very interestingly, the narrative voice never comes down on one side of this or the other. It is left, very ambiguous, and I think perhaps implies that maybe both were right to a degree. But the ambiguity of the novel is another fabulous discussion for possibly another day. So that is the background context item. Number one, the railway, the trains. So the second one, I think, is the political background noise. And these are in no particular order of importance, I guess I should say. And this one felt the most obvious to me, the easiest to pick out of the three. And I actually, along with, two copies, printed copies, I also had an electronic copy, a digital copy of Middlemarch on my Kindle app. And so I did a little word search, and the word reform comes up 62 times in this book. And that's a lot, right? So, okay. At this point in time, Great Britain is on the verge of potential political reform, which does come. I think the first Reform Act was in 1832. I don't know if you would technically call it, legislation or what the right terminology would be for Great Britain, but we are close. We're close, but not quite there. And everyone is talking about things related to that. And so once again, there's a theme. Are you sensing the theme? Okay. There is this highly anticipatory energy to the discussions that you keep getting little snippets of. There's never an overt explanation. George Eliot just isn't going to do that. Everything is just kind of a sidebar, insinuation, gossip, an overheard argument, a passing reference someone makes while they're talking about something else. Okay, so what is this reform everyone's going on about? I got to the point where I was like, okay, we are mentioning this a lot. It's pretty clear. Everyone is very concerned, anxious, anticipatory about this, and they're feeling a whole lot of kind of ways about it. So what is it, right? So I feel like I just have to say, I am not an expert on British history, okay? So there's that. But in 1829, Great Britain is looking at Europe, continental Europe, that they are the little island sitting next to, and they're like, yikes, not looking good over there, right? Like that's very much the energy. There has been revolution, there has been attempted imperialism, there has been overthrow of kings, reinstatement of kings, war, and it's just looking like a lot, right? Like there is a lot going on. And Britain really does not want to have that making its way, right, across the channel. And yes, please don't come for me. I understand that Great Britain had military involvement in the Napoleonic Wars. I'm just painting broad brush here relatively compared to what a lot of the continental European countries are experiencing in this period. Britain's fairly low-key and a bit removed. And just as a footnote, if you wanted to get a really good idea of what all this political, violent turmoil and chaos is looking like on continental Europe, you definitely read The Count of Monte Cristo. That will just really saturate you in the vibe. But, again, that's a different, really good discussion that you could have on another day. So, anyway, the British governmental bigwigs who are, sensing that there could be some rumblings, right? They're really wanting to avoid the this is an understatement perhaps, but the political drama and violence, and are trying to come up with a way, a plan to sort of appease the changing tides of political sentiment that they rightly sense may have a fair bit of support from certain groups of people in their country. hence reform. Okay. Basically, the stance here is, look, everybody calm down. We don't have to overthrow anything, kill anybody. Nobody needs to lose their head, literally or figuratively. We don't need to toss out the whole system. Look, doesn't seem to be going great over there, right? Not looking fabulous. So we just need to tweak what we have, right? Just need to do a few minor adjustments. And that's very much the energy. And this reform idea encompasses quite a few things, but perhaps the most important are redistricting. There's this whole big elaborate TED talk you could get into about the boroughs and the changing of the boroughs and dead borough. We're not going to do that. We're gonna rein it in, right? So redistricting, which, part of a result of that is also allowing more people into more men into the electorate, allowing more men to vote, and also changing the structure of parliament. That's another biggie. So those types of things. And as with the train discussion, as I'm sure you can imagine, the opposing opinions about this in Middlemarch in 1829, right, before the reforms have actually happened, it's just potential, highly likely that there will be some kind, but we don't know what they are or what they'll look like. The arguments, the disagreements, the opinions everyone is having are vituperative. That's a good word. So you have some people who are all about it. Yes, reform the shit out of it. It sucks. We are ready. We need something different. Cannot wait. Okay. Then you have the probably, as it is implied, larger contingent of people, of Middlemarchers who are pretty deeply small c conservative. And, when I say that, I don't mean as in, they are part of the conservative political party, which would be, uppercase C conservative, but they just have a conservative view of the world and how it should be structured. So that's what I mean by that. So those people don't want anything to do with this reform nonsense. Absolutely not. It's going to ruin everything. It is going to mess up the boroughs and the members of parliament, representatives, if you will, that we already have. And the new ones might be not great. And it's just going to toss a grenade into our way of life and, respectfully, no thank you. We're not interested. And they are terrified of losing or perhaps remaking the hierarchies that exist in their lives. Not that they quite state it that way, but I think it's pretty clear that is a huge part of what they are really anxious about. And yes, so this is the second thing that we have just kind of simmering away in the background. So the first was the trains, and then the second thing is all of this potential, right, political reform. It's once again that very anxious, anticipatory, when's it gonna get here and what's it gonna look like? We don't know, right? There's that whole energy to it. So the third one was the most difficult for me to really pin down. So both the railroad and the reforms were fairly easy to suss out from the text. As I said, the reform thing gets mentioned by name 62 times. The railroad is mentioned enough and in such a way that you understand this is definitely a thing. But for a long bit while I was reading through it, in my mind, I just had this third category, if you will, the background noise. I just kept thinking of it as the medical stuff. That's what I was referring to it as. And, there is a pretty clear thread of medicine in the book. There's, definitely doctor drama, and one of the characters is a new doctor who's coming into town. Talk of medication, prescriptions. George Eliot uses a lot of medically minded metaphors to describe things. So that's definitely there, but I couldn't nail it down the way that I could with the railroads and the political reform. It just felt, just irritatingly nebulous, I guess. And I was finally able to pinpoint it after, a little bit more research, and I listened to a few lectures, and I finally realized, oh, it's not just, medical stuff, which is pretty generalized. It's cholera. That's what it is. It's cholera. Now, I think I can be forgiven for kind of missing it at a first read, because cholera is only mentioned by name 9 times in this over 800-page book. So I think it was just kind of fading into the background of the medical stuff for me. But this, I think this is in fact the third thing, just sort of humming along, chugging along in the background. So, first we had the trains, secondly we had all the political reforms, and now we've got the cholera. And again, it hasn't quite happened yet. They've heard about the cholera outbreaks, right? Again, this is 1829. There have been outbreaks of cholera on the continent, and I think also in the book they mention, that it's come to England, right? It's, I think, London maybe, which would make a lot of sense. A big city is, now having cases of cholera. So again, just this really anxious, anticipatory energy, when is it going to come? And also, fascinatingly, the big question seems to be, how are we going to bury the dead? There's this really interesting, I guess I would call it nihilism, to the conversations that they're having about this potential cholera outbreak that could come to the town. There is no talk of preventative measures or how could we try to save people, because cholera, which is this really hideous bacterial, it comes from dirty water, as we now know, but they didn't know that. They don't really know what's causing the cholera in 1829. And so there, as I said, there's this kind of nihilism of, okay, well, I mean, it's just gonna kill everybody. It's gonna kill a ton of people, and we're gonna have all these dead bodies, like, where are we gonna put them, right? It's this very sort of morbidly pragmatic attitude of, well, when everybody dies, what are we gonna do? And yeah, there's different discussions about the hospital and all of those kinds of things. So, as we now know, right, with the gift of hindsight, cholera was, I think, the #1 killer of the 19th century. I don't know if that's, I can't remember if that's globally or just for Europe, but rest assured, it killed a lot of people, right? And this was already a century sort of defined by death in a lot of ways. And I think you get a good sense of that when you read novels of the 19th century, incidentally. Another really good discussion for another time. But truly, just, oh, you were cold and wet for too long? Death. You were bleeding too much and couldn't get it to stop after childbirth? Death. Accidentally drank some really dirty water? Death. Sinus infection? Death. Like, all of these, and it feels almost kind of comedic to us now because none of those things would be deadly for us, but then they were. I mean, there were so many things, seemingly simple things, that could absolutely take you out. You are done, life over. yeah, you're just surrounded by it all the time. Anyway, and now you have this new, not well understood disease making its way towards you, probably, maybe, and you just have to accept that it's probably going to kill a lot of people and doesn't have any good medical treatment, right? So I feel like even compared to the other two things I talked about, the sort of anxiety around the conversations for this thing would maybe be even at a higher pitch, which is interesting that it doesn't get mentioned as much by name. But yeah, so this is the third background noise thing. So first we had the trains, then we had the political reforms, and now we've got cholera. And again, on the verge. It hasn't gotten there yet. We haven't had a cholera outbreak yet, but we're waiting. When is it going to get here? What's it going to look like? You know, just tense to see how and when this is going to hit the town. So here we are, dropped in the middle of this 19th century middle of England town in 1829, which incidentally, for all the nerds out there, is technically the Georgian period, not the Victorian period, which comes about a decade later. So we have now sort of laid our foundation. Here we are. There are these three very large, just juggernauts careening their way toward Middlemarch, none of which is really preventable in any way. I think you could argue, you know, one is technological, the trains, one is governmental, you know, political, the reforms, and one is biochemical, disease. That's the one that you have, you know, truly the least control over. Like, it's just going to kill whoever it's going to kill. And I feel pretty confident, or I should say I felt pretty confident, knowing that these were three things to really pay attention to when I got, 500 something pages into the book. And there is actually a sentence that I am going to, or part of a sentence, because she likes long sentences, but it says, in the 100 to which Middlemarch belonged, and that's not talking about 100 people, it's talking about, I think, land divisions. So in the 100 land divisions to which Middlemarch belonged, railways were as exciting a topic as the Reform Bill or the imminent horrors of cholera. So at that moment I was like, oh good. I didn't misunderstand. I think, you know, so we've mentioned all of them together, no less, as these are the three things that are most discussed, which I think makes sense. Okay, great. So the question I think you always have to ask yourself as a reader is, and I learned this from an excellent professor, so what? Why should we care, right? You know, what does it accomplish? You're probably sitting there like, great, you've been yammering at me for over 25 minutes at this point. You know, if it's not even the main characters or the plot, like, why does this matter? Couldn't I read this book and not do a big research session about all these things and still enjoy it and understand it? Yes, actually, I think you completely could read this book knowing nothing about any of that, and you would definitely still enjoy it and get something out of it, because that is what a great writer is able to do. But personally, I think we should care, because I think it's necessary to understanding the project that George Eliot is really undertaking here, which, you know, partly maybe would be the best way to put it, partly is to present a place in a moment in time that is metaphorically and literally kind of standing on a precipice. They're at the brink. of many things. And the people who live in this little town of Middlemarch in 1829 both recognize that this precipice is sort of rushing toward their feet, and also cannot know when the edge will run out. Okay, so we've got all of our building blocks. You know, this sort of eminent foreground setting, you know, very basically. You know, obviously I haven't gotten into all the characters or anything yet, but we kind of have the idea of where we are in time. And then also sort of the bigger background currents. So what does this do in terms of storytelling? So to choose as your background, as your setting, geographically, a middle of the country town, and chronologically in terms of where your setting is placed in time, 1829, a place that has not yet been hit with this multitudinous array of really big social changes, is to do two things. I held up four fingers. Two things. So it both constricts the narrative attention and also, I would say, forces a really delicate hand in creating the suggestion of these larger social undercurrents that are at play. And I think Eliot draws our attention to this, you know, planned paradox, if you want to call it that, with her subtitle for the book, which I purposely have not mentioned until now. But this book does have a subtitle. So, what is it? I don't know if you can see this very well. I'm sorry if you can't, but here's the title, and this was the original, I don't know what the title plate, I'm not sure, but Middlemarch. But then what's the subtitle? I don't know if you can see that, but it says, A Study of Provincial Life. That's the subtitle. Okay, so now let's break it down a little bit. A study implies both a scientific scope, right? Scientists, doctors conduct studies for things. And it also, I think, suggests a really microscopic attention. If you are doing a study on something, you are really focusing on one thing. I think one of the cardinal rules of a study is, you know, don't try to look at too many things at once. It's going to ruin the results of your study. You're supposed to just really focus on something with, you know, really microscopic attention. And then maybe oddly, right next to that, this, you know, a study, is the phrase provincial life, which quite differently suggests a really broad, kind of sweeping subject that you could, you know, or concept that you could really go a lot of ways in looking at. You know, it could be quite panoramic, whereas a study definitionally probably would not be something you would call panoramic. Okay, so I think she is trying to tell her reader with this subtitle that she is going to be finding the big within the small. I do think that's the suggestion here. You have these really huge consequential concepts in the story, but they are intentionally placed as the backdrop. They are not in the foreground. And, you know, there are only so many ways that an author can build suspense, tension into the environment that they've created, into the story they're making. And this is just a very particular, very subtle way of doing it, which I love. And I don't know if I mentioned this at all passing in passing earlier, but This also creates a very specific experience for the reader, who must be reading it. You know, even someone who picked up a first edition of this book, you know, or was reading each serial installment as it's coming out, starting in 1871, is going to be reading this. They must be reading this as a person who knows how these historical events played out. We know, they would have known as the first time readers exactly how these things went with the political reforms and the cholera and the trains. So what do we have then? We have this, to me, absolutely fascinating threefold tension happening, right? Tension on three fronts. So first there's the tension between the small scale town of Middlemarch in 1829 and its impending, very large scale social changes that are coming, but they're not there yet, right? So that creates a tension. And then there's a tension between the, if you want to think of it this way, the all-knowing reader and the unknowing cast of characters. That creates a different kind of tension. And then there is also the narrative tension between a really microscopic focus on certain people in a certain place in a certain time and a much broader commentary on really big ideas for all of humanity, really, I think is a fair argument. And most authors probably couldn't do that successfully. Like, that's just a lot to hold at once and do it well. But of course George Eliot manages it because she's brilliant. She is brilliant, which I've said it like 17 times at this point, but yet another fascinating discussion for another day. So as a sort of last roundup, I suppose, I think this shows, like, doing this in this way, creating this kind of a structure, shows so much faith in your reader, to paint with such subtle strokes and assume that they're going to get it. And it actually had me thinking that maybe that is why Virginia Woolf spoke of it the way that she did. It must be a really famous comment that she made. I don't know if it was written or verbal because it's on the back of this edition. But yes, Virginia Woolf said that, talking about Middlemarch, that it was one of the few English novels written for grown-up people. And I wonder if maybe that's what she's referring to, sort of the confidence that George Eliot had in writing such a book that you are not being spoon-fed anything. You kind of have to figure it out. And, as I said, I think that shows a lot of faith in your reader. It shows a lot of respect for your reader and for the story that you're making. And so all of that to say that, I don't know, it just felt really appropriate for me to kind of set the stage in that way, before sort of moving on to the more obvious points for discussion, like the characters and the overall plot and all of those things. And I just felt like there was kind of a wonderful symmetrical poetry to it, just as the people in this little fictional middle of the country town are sort of at that moment of taking a deep breath before plunging in underwater and having no idea how far you'll have to swim. This felt like it could be my deep breath before a plunge into the water of, unknown length. And, I hope it's fun. I hope I have a good time. I hope I haven't bored you to death. If you're still here, thank you for listening to me, yak away for however long this has been. And I love to you know, convene with other book nerds. So if you have anything that you want to add or this made you think of something, go for it. Oh, that sounds like a good time. And yeah, thank you for being here. We'll see where it goes.